Hello and welcome to this another set of our discussions with on COVID-19 and how India is responding to the challenge. We have had at ORF, we have been conducting a set of discussions regularly on this topic. And today we have a very special guest with us, Lieutenant General Raj Shukla, who is Director General Perspective Planning at Army Headquarters. Who is very kind, who has been very kind to take his time off from his busy schedule to talk with us about some things related to the Indian military, how it is dealing with some of the immediate consequences of what is happening in the world and in the country, and perhaps some of the longer-term challenges that Indian military might face as a consequence of this pandemic. So very welcome. And let me start with you by asking you a sort of a very broader question as to what are the respective service branches doing as part of this larger national response to COVID-19? And is this putting some pressure on the resources, or is it well within the existing capabilities that you have?
Well, thank you, Harsh, for the invite, first of all. And responding to your question, well, what we are doing is that within this overarching frame of what we call Op Namaste, we are tackling COVID-19 in a two-pronged manner. First is, of course, force protection, and the other is assisting the civil administration in boosting our national resilience architecture to take on this crisis, which is one of its kind. Of course, this is part of a MOD-wide coordinated action plan with the Honorable Raksha Mantri at the helm and in accord with the directions of the CDS and the DMA. As far as force protection is concerned, which for obvious reasons, it is one of our topmost concerns, exhaustive instructions were issued as early as February on aspects pertaining to hygiene, sanitation, physical distancing, wearing of protective gear, isolation, quarantine, contact tracing. We took a number of other measures like extension of leave, a vigorous exploitation of the digital medium, suspension of training, large-scale training, freezing of postings and travel, working from home, skeletal attendance for essential office work, basically scrupulous adherence to designated protocols. We've also crafted and are now executing a carefully thought-through medical management plan. And this is in concert with the Ministry of Health, the MHA, other central ministries, because this is a time where we need a whole of government approach. So that's happening, and just the highlights of what has been done as part of this medical plan. We have created 12 quarantine facilities across the length and breadth of the country, from Jalipa and Barmer to Bagjola in Calcutta. Manesar, Jaisalmer, Jodhpur have been used extensively, as you know, to quarantine and test returnees from Iran, Italy, Wuhan, and Japan. 113 of our hospitals have been restructured, repurposed, and geared up for the COVID crisis. 13 have been earmarked exclusively as COVID hospitals, and we have created 9,000 beds for COVID, about 1,400 for what is called the higher dependence units, and about 400 ICU beds. We've got 300 ICU ventilators, we've procured them. We have an additional 225 transportable ventilators from our field hospitals. The Army Design Bureau has helped us to map and identify sources of supply for PPE, testing kits, medical applications, prefab shelters, fumigation chambers, and so on and so forth. We've mapped about 150 sources of supplies. The MOD has empowered the Director General of Armed Forces Medical Services. In consequence, orders of about 333 crores have been placed. 246 crores for equipment, 87 crores for consumables. Orders placed, this equipment is coming in, most of it has reached. Field commanders right up to division have been empowered, emergency procurement powers, and orders worth about 60 crores have been placed in the fields, and there is more on the anvil. 9 testing facilities have been created in consultation with the ICMR at the RR Hospital in Delhi, at Ashwini in Bombay, the 6 command hospitals, the Air Force Command Hospital in Bangalore. So we have created a range of responses and capacities to tackle the crisis.
Thank you, sir. So, just two questions which I would like you to answer together, if you can. Organizationally, is there a central planning mechanism for the response efforts within the military, either at the apex level or the field level? And how do you find interfacing with the civilian authorities, for example? Is it, how is the interface going on? Whether it's the state governments, whether you have the transport organizations, whether you have the NDMA or NDRF. How is that interface proceeding?
Well, at the Indian Army level, we formed what is called the COVID Crisis Management Group. It is headed by the Director General Military Operations, and the two prominent members of this group are obviously the Director General Medical Services Army and the Adjutant General. They are key participants. All other branches are providing support in managing this crisis. We have daily meetings, sometimes twice a day. There are meetings with the Ministry of Health, with the Ministry of Home Affairs, where our reps attend. And the COVID Crisis Group, Management Group, on a daily basis reports to the Chief of Army Staff for necessary strategic guidance and directions. Our regional commands are in touch with the respective state governments, local administrations to provide assistance. We've set up what are called COVID monitoring cells at each of the command headquarters, with the ops and medical branches working in close synergy. They are monitoring the spread, progressing procurement of COVID-related equipment, overseeing the creation of quarantine and isolation facilities, boosting medical infrastructure, supervising the medical training of medical teams to include sanitization, decontamination. At the field level, teams have been mobilized to ensure a coordinated response. To just give you a sense of readiness in the field, for assistance if required in the far-flung corners at the request of Civil Adam. We are already doing some awareness camps. We have created basic amenity teams to cater for disruptions in, say, water supply and electricity. We set up COVID response teams to tackle requests for decontamination or to respond to requests for decontamination. We've trained our battlefield nursing assistants in the basics of COVID care. We are helping with access control. We've also set up these QRMTs, quick reaction medical teams, which if required, each team will be able to take care of about 50 isolation patients and 10 COVID patients. So right from the apex down through the commands to the field, we have, in concert with Civil Adam, other ministries, the NDMA, we have taken a slew of measures to tackle the crisis.
So now to some of the immediate consequences, immediate impact of this crisis. Obviously, as you mentioned, immediate things are being done, protocols being put in place, whether it's regard to social distancing, staggered timings of work, etc., etc. But at the same time, operational issues remain. For example, shelling continues across the border. LOC, we have seen infiltration going on. We know that there are routine peacetime operations for Indian Navy or Indian Air Force. You have professional military education that supposedly has to continue in training academies and war colleges. So overall, what is your assessment of the kind of immediate impact this crisis is having on the military as a whole?
Before I come to your the specific question, I'll just take 30 seconds more to tell you what the wider armed forces community has also been doing. It has swung into action and galvanized to respond to this crisis. The NCC, for example, it has 17 directorates with outreach to 28 states, 8 union territories, a nationwide reach. So that has been leveraged for things like traffic management, supply chain management, preparation of food items, queue management, so on and so forth. Our ex-servicemen volunteers, from the medical fraternity, we've had 53 doctors and about 1,000 paramedics who have volunteered so far, offered their services for use if the situation so requires, and more are on the way. Our non-medical veterans, you would heard of the 45 bicycle riders in Bangalore who are giving medicines and food to the old and the infirm, and similar initiatives from AP, Uttar Pradesh, Punjab, Northeast, Chhattisgarh. The AWA has done its bit for preparing food packets for the marginalized sections in Delhi and elsewhere. So the armed forces community as a whole has been galvanized. Your specific question on the impact on the military. Now, as I said, this crisis is the defining global health crisis of our times. It is therefore a huge challenge. Well, we've been quick to respond in our view and have modified our operations functioning appropriately. Some of the measures I told you about, physical distancing, so on and so forth. And we've had only 9 positive cases so far, with 2 having recovered, of which 2 are medical officers and 1 is a nursing assistant. So it is good work thus far, touch wood. We're keeping our fingers crossed for an army of our size. We have put on hold all activities which require massing of personnel, to include training events and big exercises. Exercises with troops, recruitment rallies, and so on, they have been paused. However, insofar as our operational readiness along the line of control and the LAC, the hinterland in the valley, the security of military establishments is concerned, there is no let-up in our posture. We remain vigilant along the LC. You're aware that very recently we foiled an infiltration attempt to the Kiran sector. We are determined to maintain our ascendancy on the LC. We also continue to dominate the hinterland, where on every metric of progress there has been substantial improvement. Along the LAC, patrolling continues as hitherto. We have suspended commemorative BPMs, those that were held on specific occasions, while flag meetings are being held with necessary physical distancing. So we modified tactical protocols, but there is no let-up in our posture along the LC and the LAC. Along the LAC, there's a greater reliance on hotlines, but we continue to be alert and vigilant. The training academies have recalibrated their schedules. We have more online classes. The digital medium is being exploited. Physical activities with necessary distancing is now becoming a part of the routine. Meal timings are being staggered. So there's once again, a range of measures have been taken. We've adapted to the crisis. And after 3rd June, when the lockdown is going to lift, we will take a second review of what we need to do.
Sir, this obviously this crisis is going to have a major impact, as you have already alluded to, in terms of the economic activity, in terms of GDP, in terms of what countries are able to muster in terms of the natural resources. So clearly the budgetary ramifications for the military will also be important. And it goes without saying that the planning directorates will be factoring this resource crunch into their projections. We would like to hear what's your take on this and what kind of reforms this might accelerate within the military.
Well, obviously the COVID-19 has impacted the global economy in a huge way, and the Indian economy will not be able to escape the impact too. It is a little early to speculate on the precise nature and quantum of cuts in the defense budget. But we are very clear that our effort will be to make sure that cuts, if any, do not impinge on our capability development. That is our capital acquisition, particularly the new schemes. Now, it's going to be a challenge, but that's going to be our effort. Insofar as the budgetary ramifications are concerned, as of now, only expenditure restrictions for the first quarter have been promulgated for various departments, including the Army. So we are taking a look at that. But there's one thing I wish to point out, that for the last 2 to 3 years, the Army has done a great deal about optimizing its revenue expenditure. We will continue to take steps to surgically eradicate fluff and flab. I'll just tell you 2-3 issues about this budgetary optimization, which we did before COVID, we'll continue to do during COVID or in response to COVID. This is essential. Firstly, there is much greater budgetary consciousness now. The manner in which we scrutinize each head, each subhead, we do a real microscopic examination, and we've done it. We've taken a very careful look at what is called our non-salary revenue, our electricity bills, our works, the manner in which we can optimize by going green, the amount we spend on rations, travel, our bills to the OFBs, the PSUs and the DRDO. We are becoming much more demanding customers, trying to get the maximum bang for the buck. We are looking at our payment terms, we are modifying them. The sole business of receipts, recoveries, and deducts, we are reevaluating our needs. For example, our training scales of ammunition. Can we economize on them? Basically, each of these heads and subheads, we are aligning them with best practices and modern metrics. That is something which is being done over the last 2 to 3 years, and we are really focused on this. We are taking a cluster-based approach towards creation of capacities. For example, instead of creating capacities in each cantonment, can we create a cluster for places like in proximity, for example, Nabha, Patiala, Sangrur, I'm just giving you a head on the details to which we have gone to optimize our budget. We have carried out these studies, which are called CT1, CT2 studies. We are looking at optimizing about 40,000 people, which will lead to an annual savings of about 2,450 crores. This whole business of IBGization, apart from having a very strong op rationale, is also driven by the need to have lean, mean and agile forces, cost savings there. And the whole aim is to free monies from revenue for capital acquisitions. So we've done a great deal. We intend to do a lot more, and COVID-19, I think, will only accelerate the whole process. We are doing a great deal to expand our capacity to spend fast, what is known as Q1 focus. If you plan early, you have these, pipelines, your procurement pipelines going like up. We've got our processes going so that there are always schemes available for signing of contracts. So, I would like to use this occasion, since I've been dealing with this whole issue, that we have really gone, looked at our budget surgically, and we are trying to take from our revenue expenditure what we could leverage it best so that we create capacities, new schemes, capability building. We're looking at about 3,000 crores every year. Now, obviously, any organization would like to spend a substantial portion of its budget on capex. The need for that is known, and I've told you what we are doing. But in our context, you see, given the nature of the unsettled borders, LC and the LAC, there is going to be an OPEX component. So in my view, we have brought this 80-18 ratio down to somewhere in the region of 75-25. Below that, as long as the borders are unsettled, this OPEX expenditure is a strategic necessity and is a function really of the unsettled borders and the protection of our core strategic interests. So as I said, we are all for right sizing, reorganizing our structures, correcting revenue capital skews, improving our teeth to tail ratios, moving from a process-driven budgeting system to a budgeting system which is outcome-focused. This is the Chief's KRA. We are really at it. MOD is on board. As far as the COVID crisis is concerned, though budgetary optimization is a continuous process, the Chief has already ordered 2 studies. One is to take a look at the immediate impact on budget, training, acquisitions, and 2, COVID will have a long-term impact. People are already talking of a second wave and a third wave and the virus mutating. So in terms of long-term impact, we are taking a complete look at the geostrategic equations, what the new strategic context will be, therefore what will the new threats be, what emphasis should we lay on the non-traditional paradigm, so this whole business we are doing, trying to keep not only ahead of the budgetary challenge, but also ahead of the strategic challenge. So there's a big effort in that regard. Much has been done and a great deal more needs to be done. That's what I wish to say.
And since you talked about the global context, international cooperation at this point in time is not only important, it's imperative. And Prime Minister, the government has been quite articulate and very active on the global front, even at a time when countries are building. Countries are becoming more and more inward-looking. What kind of other contingency plans you have for assisting countries, not only in South Asia and beyond, if need be, if required?
I couldn't agree with you more. This is the time to demonstrate statesmanship and to connect with the world. And I think the Honorable Prime Minister has done just that in mobilizing the SAARC and his outreach to the G20 to share information, best practices, and adopt collaborative measures in fighting the pandemic. We are, of course, in constant touch with the MOD, the MEA, and the DMA. 2 specific steps that have been taken to assist neighboring and friendly foreign countries. A medical team comprising of 14 members was deployed in Male to assist the Maldives government in ramping up the COVID-19 infrastructure. The team comprised of specialists in preventive and social medicine, microbiologists, respiratory specialists, nursing staff, paramedics, and they rendered advice and assistance while working closely with the health authorities in Male and outlying islands. At the request of the government of the state of Kuwait, a rapid response team of 8 medical officers and 7 paramedics was deputed to Kuwait on the 11th of April for capability development. So, depending on requests from foreign governments, in concert with the MEA and the MOD, on a case-to-case basis, we are extending assistance to countries that need them, and we'll continue to do so.
And of course, something that we have already alluded to, as the global economic environment changes, there's going to be enormous pressure on global supply chains. You have major defense contractors who will face this pressure. You have Indian PSUs, Indian private sector, which is participating in the defense sector, will face this problem. Are there concerns about, and this again, something that you have already talked about in a different context, are there concerns about the deliveries of platforms that perhaps you need on an immediate basis and that might be delayed? And how is it being viewed within the military at the moment?
Well, of course, it's a concern, Harsh, and we are looking at it in two ways. I'll give you those two strands of thought. One is that, since defense production is an elaborate process and it is long drawn, it is spread over years, it may be, I say, relatively immune to these short episodic disruptions, if at all the crisis turns out in that manner. And if it is short, then there are numerous procedural cushions available to us, which can be leveraged to fast-track production once matters normalize. The second issue is that the Indian Army in particular, over the last 4 or 5 years, we have gone in majorly for indigenous equipment, under IDDM and Buy Indian and so far. So our dependency is more on Indian manufacturers and not as much on global supply chains. So perhaps that is also a happy consequence. But we are reviewing our entire contracts and procurement plans in detail to see what the specific impact of the crisis will be on each of these, the PSUs, the startups, industry, garage innovators, MSMEs, because each of them have their own peculiar set of problems. And it will be our endeavor to ensure that the impact on local vendors is minimized. We are in dialogue with all stakeholders. The MOD has recently announced a slew of measures, and we are rejigging our plans and procedures appropriately. 2 steps have already been taken. The industry has been allowed to delay its submission of RFPs. The DPSUs have been told to expedite their payments to the MSMEs to minimize impact. So that is something that we've done already. This crisis has also brought up this whole business of the remarkable, depth of innovation in our defense startups. For example, there's a startup in Kochi which has manufactured this N95 mask with entirely new technology. There's a startup in Delhi in concert with IIT Kanpur which is manufacturing a ventilator. There is this Sri Chitra Thiruval Institute of Medical Sciences and Technology in Trivandrum, which has come up with a new testing kit. One of the startups I know, which was focusing on near space UAVs, has quickly redeployed to meet some of the needs of the railways in managing their wagons and all. So this whole innovation startup culture, which was created for defense, the fact that it has been able to quickly redeploy to meet the needs of the COVID crisis speaks, I think, very well of the innovation culture that has been set into motion over the last 2 to 3 years. And the last point is that if this crisis acquires more difficult proportions, we are looking at that aspect and considering a slew of measures, policy, regulatory, legal, rationalization of schemes, fast tracking, to see whether the defense sector itself could help in reviving the economy and how it could do that. Now, since it has cross-sectoral impact, there are interministerial consultations going on. But broadly, we are looking at Make in India defense to revive the economy, should it come to that. The need to fast-track protocols, enhance delegations, how we can give a further fillip to startups and IDEX, and things like the Innovation Challenge and so preferential access to Indian defense companies, not merely a level playing field, but a preferential access. But these are just being debated at the moment because we are considering the effects of these moratoriums. And now the focus will not only be on manufacturing, but on digitization. So even in this crisis, I see huge opportunities coming up. And as I said, that in each of the realms that I stated, policy, regulatory, legal, we are looking at how we could make things better for the Make in India defense, our defense startups and all. But it is a wide consultative process. It will take time, but in a proactive measure. This is what we are doing to see what we could do with the immediate impact and the long-term impact.
Thank you, sir. Just I would like to raise a few important questions at the end, which are sort of beyond the immediate crisis that we are facing. We would really like to hear if you can elaborate a bit on your thoughts, and you have already done that in bits and pieces here and there in this conversation. But again, what is your thinking about the emerging global environment, and especially the future operating environment for the Indian military, as you see it at this point in time, and what consequences might that have for the way we think, for the way we operate, for the way we put forces on the ground, and for the larger military posture that we have conceived of?
Well, as far as the global situation is concerned, Harsh, you are the expert. I can only, in all humility, offer a few thoughts of my own. And there, if I may just first turn to the lessons from the COVID-19 crisis, I think the most abiding lesson is this, that in an increasingly globalizing world, we cannot afford to undermine multilateralism and global institutions of governance and public health. The fact that nations cut their mandatory funding to the WHO, I'm told from about 70% in the 1970s to about 18-19%, had an effect on what it could do in terms of research, epidemiology, virology, and we are seeing the consequences. So strengthening issues of governance and public health is, I think, an area of foremost importance. Then we have also seen the huge hazards of excessive dependency on limited supply chains. So these are the two most obvious issues which have surfaced. Also, the crisis is yet unfolding. I mean, is it going to have trigger these bigger boom-bust cycles? We've already had oil. This almost ridiculous proposition where people are paying you to buy oil. I'm told they pay you $37 to buy a barrel of oil. These were just unfathomable a few weeks back. So they are going to be larger issues of this sort. I mean, broadly, there is a health crisis, there is an economic crisis, there is going to be a crisis on global financial institutions, and there's going to be a crisis in defense. So we are looking at all this. Somebody said to kill the virus, you will have to first kill the global economy, bring to a halt. I think it was Professor Philip Martin, the advisor to Mr. Macron, who said this. The point is that if defense capabilities primarily came from excesses or surpluses in economies, and if the economic situation is going to get so bad, where will defense capabilities come from? So this is a larger question, but here I think there is the alternative view which we must seriously consider, that defense itself could be used to pump prime the economy in the manner that I suggested. And in this changed world order, we will have to take a look, where do you place the instrument of force in your strategic worldview? That positioning has to shift. I mean, kinetics cannot be done away with, but kinetics are essential because you see, even in this crisis, the LC, LAC things are on. So kinetics is important, but we will need to make a certain repositioning towards non-kinetics, influence operations. Are there smarter ways to acquire competitive advantage? That is what we need to see without getting into direct confrontations. So I would say less of Clausewitz, more of Kautilya and Sun Tzu. These are some of the challenges, I think, of the futures. Non-traditional threats, extreme climate, pandemics, massive displacement of populations, things which we would dismiss in the past as something that real militaries don't do, I think is something that we will need to take a very serious look at. So a microscopic examination of these threats. We are already seeing how warfare is moving to the non-contact domain. We are taking a deeper dive in that. But the moot point at the end of the day, and this is the real military challenge, is that even as all this is happening, the traditional threats remain unabated. In sum, therefore, the challenge is one of growing military burdens in an era of budgetary constraints. Finite budgets how can you carefully plan, prioritize decisively, and optimize your budgets? It is a huge military challenge. Balancing your kinetic attributes with your non-kinetic prowess. This is something which we need to take a deep, hard look. I know easy solutions, but all I can tell you that the CDS, the chief, taking a very serious look at the issues. That's how we look at the futures.
So we have already run out of time, but I will on this, since you mentioned CDS, the CDS question, the CDS, the appointment of the CDS has generated a lot of enthusiasm about the integration across multiple domains and services. And given the predominance of the army in this framework, its role would be key, not only in making it possible, but also effective. So how do you view this role for the Indian Army, in particular now in the context of CDS, and how this role is going to evolve over the next coming months and years?
Well, the first point I'd make is that the predominance of the army is only in numbers. Otherwise, we are entirely joint in our outlook. And in that context, in my view, in our view, the creation of the CDS is a seminal step towards integration of the three services and associated domains. It will not only integrate the three services amongst themselves, but also the services with the larger national security frame. And it's already doing that. We are already beginning to see results, and I think it's a game changer in the national security dynamic. Inclusion of the services in policy decisions, steering of reforms, better and faster budgetary prioritization, faster clearances of proposals and files, doctrinal calibration, greater verve in military diplomacy, the procurement function, less capital, is moving faster, also the capital function. All in all, better institutional synergy. We've got this roadmap for joint theatre commands it's being discussed. The modalities for an air defense command and an oceanic command are being seen in greater detail. We are taking a joint look at military futures, issues like AI, blockchain, quantum, which are really going to impact the way the militaries fight. And now we are looking at not merely jointness, but full spectrum integration, how space and cyber can leverage the three traditional domains. So I think on this whole jointness front, CDS and DMA are game changers. They're seminal steps. Insofar as the Indian Army is concerned, our chief directions are clear that the future lies in jointness and integration, and our commitment to the whole project is complete and unequivocal. Wisdom will also lie, however, in respecting single service angularities and proficiencies. That is the big lesson from the jointmanship journey of the West. That is also being done. So in sum, I'll say there are huge opportunities here, and I do hope we make the most of them.
Thank you, sir. We also hope that we make the most of these institutional changes, as well as the ability of the Indian military to help the nation in this time of grave crisis. Thank you so much for sharing your valuable time, and maybe continue this conversation forward in the future as well. Thank you so much.
A great pleasure, Harsh. Thank you very much. Thank you.